Alright, hey, welcome back to the studio. Today I've got a little 9x12 I'm working on that's going to depict a scene from the top of Big Mountain Resort. It's actually Whitefish Mountain Resort now, but it's still Big Mountain to me. Anyway, it's an iconic scene that a lot of locals know because on a clear, beautiful day, when you get to the top of the summit, there is just a phenomenal view of Glacier National Park. It's something all the locals live for, and this soggy, socked-in valley really gets some sunshine, and you can see the glorious nature of the park from up there. It's wonderful. Now, the real project behind this is going to be a holiday card. I almost always forget, and so this year I want to be ahead of the game and making my own custom holiday card with some of my own art. And so this project is going to start here as a painting of Mount Stimson in Glacier Park, and I'll take it from here, move it digitally, and start creating a card out of it. So I can probably show you guys some of that process too as I'm goofing around, but for now we're just going to work wet into wet with oil paints. Going to be mixing and blending a lot of really similar tones and values. It's a lot of close work, so it might be kind of boring or hard to see what's going on, but ultimately this should really be a beautiful scene with tons of atmosphere, something I love to paint. It's always the mountains. So without further ado, let's get into it. Right, so with my tones pre-mixed with the palette knife, I'm able to jump in really quick and not worry about mixing everything up. I've got some good, strong building blocks. I'm going to jump in at the razor sharp edge of Mount Stimson. You can see it off to the right on my reference material. So this edge is really what I want to build the whole painting off of, creating the balance between the sky, the edge of the mountain, and then the shaded side is what will really influence the rest of the painting. If I can get these values and colors set up just the way I want them, then everything else can just fall into place. So I spend quite a bit of time just working up here, modifying those three pretty simple shapes and simple values and colors. Graying it back a little bit in the sky. And here going back into the shaded side of the peak to create the right pop and value between that lit edge and the shaded side. See, I'm just gently feathering it in there. I'm not going all in until I know what I want. Once I get it dialed in, I can go ahead and start filling it in more, still adding some light as it goes down. Start throwing in some more of the drawing. Now the sky, I decided to add a little bit more interest by adding clouds instead of just that white haze that so often can plague the northwest Montana area, called the milky sky. So really it's clouds, but they're so high and so soft that the light still comes through them, but they're not very exciting. So as the artist, I get to choose to upgrade them. I'm jumping in with some juicy paint. Anywhere there's going to be really thick, opaque paint, I can know that the texture will help create more interest, and as it's glazed and finished, light will bounce off those little ridges and just make it seem even brighter. You don't want to go that thick and juicy in the shadows because it'll almost then create these sparkling effects in the shadows, which would ruin that immersion. And softening it back, adding some more in. This is a process I definitely go through a lot, is adding and removing and adding and removing. Feels like working with clay almost. I'm just making the sky up. Painted enough clouds to kind of have a rough idea of things. I should probably look up better reference material and have actual clouds and the similar lighting, but right now I'm thinking of them as just soft forms and wanting to use them to create a better story of where that light's coming from. That's what matters to me more than picture perfect clouds. They're really just supposed to be in the background anyway. Using shadows in the clouds to push them back. I'm working fairly thin here. I'm not just dumping the paint on, but I'm also not using a lot of turpentine either. So the paint's pretty malleable and easy to blend with. So I can do some mixing just there on the canvas. So to add a bit more warmth to the sky. And all these elements to work together, and as I add things, I'll often have to go back and change things I've already done. There's so many relationships to juggle here, and being able to stay plastic and modify them continually is a big piece of painting. Some artists make it look like they can just almost print them out, but for me, I kind of go through a process of discovery as I'm going. I'm tweaking things until I really can't handle it anymore. That's part of the finishing phase. But what we're doing now is the block in. So here I'm going to just mass out things a little bit more. I cover all that yellow underpainting undertone. Which on that note, the yellow that you're seeing on the canvas is actually rubbed on with a paper towel weeks ahead of time. I allow it just to dry and set up. It's just a yellow ochre and raw umber mostly. Whatever mix of those colors I have laying around. And just giving it something besides bright white to work off of. I find it helps have something warm underneath all these blue tones. It can add a little bit of transparency to it and a little extra, I don't know, just a little bit of warmth, variety of some kind. And without being acrylic gesso, the oil paint that's there, even when it's just a thin dried layer, it helps the oil paint stick more. It's hard to explain, but I highly recommend trying out underpainting or undertoning your canvas a little bit, especially if you can let it dry. Distant mountain there is just very faintly visible, almost the same color as the sky. So here I am going back with more shadows into the clouds, just staying plastic, able to keep changing things, nitpicking some of that yellow underpainting showing through, giving that razor sharp edge some definition. And with that, moving into the middle ground here. This part is very important just to kind of keep the depth happening. I'm going to go slightly darker and slightly more purple, more saturated blue. But I'm not confidently doing this. There's a pretty thin veil of paint there because I know I'm going to be changing that quite a bit and not just directly finding it. These are very gentle gradations I'm looking for, and if I can get them right off the bat, that's cool, but if not, it's nice to work with some thinner paint that doesn't just fight me as I'm making changes. A lot of beginner artists seem to either go too thick or too thin as they're going. Either way is a challenge to work with. I'm adding some of that bright white, and I'll cut right back in with some darks. It's okay to change things. You gotta just keep saying that to yourself. It's okay to change things. And this is the process of discovery. Now here, unfortunately, guys, the camera overheated. This is just a shot I had of it, but unfortunately, we speed ahead now to about 40 or 50 minutes up. That camera was not running and didn't say anything. There was no alarms or beeps, so very, very bummed about that, but we still got the second phase done here and filmed, so you can still see how the foreground gets developed, and then also a lot of that middle ground is yet to go. Here I'm jumping in with some trees, giving that foreground a scale. You know, this isn't detail for detail's sake. I'm going to continue to say that to you guys as you're watching, that detail is a tricky piece. You know, you can really over detail things and it can break your sense of depth. But detail is important. As things are close to you, you can usually see more of them and have more refined shapes. But thinking them as shapes and not details is going to make it a lot easier and hopefully more fun to look at. Instead of just really stiffly rendered, you can have a bit of fun both painting it, and the viewer can have more fun looking at it. Adding some really juicy paint. Again, I'll be able to mix back into that even once it's on the canvas. Since oil paint takes so long to dry, you can really use that to your advantage later on. Going in with a shaded side of some of these very subtle peaks, kind of softly rolling by adding in those sky blues. That's the reflected sky color coming off of the snow. And even though it's not quite as light as the sky, and it's definitely not as light as the sunny side of the snow, it helps give the sense of dimension and creates the rolling look that I'm going for here. I want those mountains to feel really pillowy and soft. With those set up, I'm going to start adding some of the detail. Again, if you want to call it that. Shapes. Smaller and smaller shapes. More and more variety and more interest. And again, they really need to work together. The foreground needs to stand on its own compared to the middle ground and then compared to the background. If those elements can work together and gradient in the same sense of scale, if I was to add little tiny trees on the top of Mount Stimson right now, we'd really be breaking that scale. So it's important to realize that, again, those details, they have an influence on even the sense of depth. And I'm also not directly copying this photo very closely. There's a ton of little shapes going on in there, and ultimately they don't really matter. If somebody wants a picture perfect replica of that view, they can just print this photo out. But I'm here to tell a story and make it have more of my voice as an artist and more of the sensation, the emotions, kind of capturing the joy of that place. And that goes beyond just its representation, in my opinion. With that, I'm creating the glowing effect around these trees. I want the sun to really seem like it's shining and backlighting them a little bit. So I'm using some yellow ochre and some different umbers and things to create a still pretty dark and pretty low saturated. I'm going in there with cadmium right now, but it still gives us a little bit of warmth to push against that rich blue that's back there. It creates a sensation of sunlight bouncing and going around the edges of objects. See, scaling back that detail again. As I add more to the foreground, I'll add a little bit more to the middle ground. Painting a million little trees. And I'm not vividly copying these trees either. Some of the best advice I have ever had about painting forests or trees and whatnot was not to paint individual trees, but to paint the forest itself. If you can do that, then the piece again will mimic how we see things. If I look out into that forest, I might see one or two trees more clearly, maybe ones that are more interesting or just more beautiful. I don't know. There's a few trees that'll stand out to me, and then the rest of the trees kind of fall back. And that's a common way of how our eyes work, where we would look at one thing and the rest of the objects kind of fall out of focus. So if you can paint in that same way, it's going to keep it more alive and more natural feeling, not just stiffly everything in focus. As that foreground gets darker, I then can push my middle ground just slightly darker, and scaling that value and scaling that depth. Having a lot of fun while I'm doing it, just creating some little these brush strokes are kind of similar in a way. They kind of have a pattern to them. Just a fun way of exploring your voice as an artist. I get lured into the background again. Again, as I'm painting, I might notice something back there. I'm stepping backwards a lot. You don't see this because this is all edited down, but I'm stepping back quite a bit to just make sure this is reading well and having integrity from a distance. Really want the paintings to grab people from their living room, from their couch. You want this thing to just shout out to them, and that's what I'm trying to do. And I step back. You might notice these things that need more changing. Just softening the sky a little bit now. here I'm creating that edge. I'm just pushing it a little bit harder, and in a way that foreground snowbank just appears a little bit brighter now, and that was just because I pushed the values down, creating more contrast, even though it's still a very subtle change. Little decisions add up. This orange rim light I'm just putting right on the edge of the shadow and the sunlight. This pushes the warmth and gives that sunny glow. I do this a lot in my paintings because it's just so beautiful. You can see it a lot in nature, but cameras very rarely capture that effect. Now I'm knocking back the area I've decided to put my signature. It's important to have the signature be able to go on smoothly, especially since I have such fine lines in mine, and I want it to be legible, so this knocking the paint back gives me a more thin base that I can more easily paint on without having to let the painting dry completely. Just scaling some of the detail around it. Final warms, adding some yellows to that snow, warming it up to the sunny side. Adding those same warmths to the kind of glittering snowfields in the distance, adding some harmony, unifying things a little bit. Some blue reflected light on the top of this snowbank, snowy foreground. Just makes it feel more alive, more light. And now it's signature time. With that thinner base, I'm able to cleanly write it down and not have it getting dragged around and turning all gray and mucky. I want to make sure my signature is legible. As cheesy as it sounds, someone might be looking at this painting in 100 years. Them being able to see and understand my last name could be really helpful in them researching my painting. On whatever the internet looks like then. Maybe they'll just have some crazy chip, some brain scanner. Here I'm adding my little skiers. I want to add a little human element to this painting, and it really sets the scale to just how epic and huge those mountains feel, and just always like my people to be small in my paintings, people or animals. It's really about the landscape for me. That's my own personal decision. A couple tiny little details here and there, creating some texture and noise, just making that foreground stand out, unifying our background, a couple last highlights, really coming to the end here. With that, I think it's done. All right, well, here's the piece all finished up. Sorry for the technical difficulties. It seemed like the camera actually overheated and just turned off on me, so it seems like it's always something. I'm learning every video. Thanks for being patient with me and sitting through them all. I appreciate you guys being here. Hopefully you learned something watching. Again, if you have questions, hit me up. I'm going to take a photo of this and throw it into my iPad so I can do some of the digital side of making this card, and I'll show you guys that finished product too. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. And until then, see you next video.